Hello and welcome to Election 2019, making the electoral process more accessible for those living with acquired brain injury. With the upcoming federal election in October, we are collaborating with Elections Canada to ensure those living with brain injury are included in the campaign process and are able to vote. I would like to thank you all for watching and for being engaged in the upcoming election. Elections can be very exciting, but also very overwhelming for many. At Brain Injury Canada, we understand how hard it is to get your voice heard, and due to the invisible nature of acquired brain injury, the challenges and barriers faced by those living with it every day. The goal of this presentation is to review the electoral process in the context of accessibility. So we have a variety of areas to cover today, including a bit about both Brain Injury Canada and Elections Canada, a review of the electoral process, reasons why you should vote, some of the challenges and barriers faced by those with ABI in the electoral process based on real feedback from people across Canada. The campaign process, including finding and communicating with the candidates in your riding. And It's Our Vote, Federal Election 2019, a presentation from Elections Canada. And then we'll cover voting step by step, what you can expect at the polls on election day. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is McDonald, and I am the Executive Director of Brain Injury Canada. I am very fortunate to be joined today by Juan Melara-Pineda, who is a Senior Outreach Officer with Elections Canada. We know this is a very busy time for Elections Canada, so I'd like to sincerely thank you for being here with us today and for Elections Canada's support in making the upcoming election more accessible. Welcome, Juan. And Juan will be speaking a little bit later in the presentation. I'd also like to welcome all of our viewers. The reason we have done a recorded presentation is that we know this is a lot of information and it can be overwhelming. So please take your time, pause the recording when you need to, take notes, or send us questions at info@braininjurycanada.ca. Juan will give information later in the presentation on how to contact Elections Canada, and all of this information will also be posted on our website at braininjurycanada.ca/election 2019. So to talk a bit about Brain Injury Canada, our mission is to enhance the quality of life of individuals and families, caregivers living with brain injury in Canada. Our vision is for all individuals with the effects of brain injury to be supported, valued, and engaged in their communities. We focus our work in the areas of post-trauma research, education, awareness, and advocacy, and work in partnership with provincial, territorial, and community brain injury associations, as well as other partners and stakeholders. Elections Canada is an independent, nonpartisan agency responsible for conducting federal elections and referendums. Their mission is to ensure that Canadians can exercise their democratic right to vote and be a candidate. Elections Canada's day-to-day activities and decision-making are guided by the following key values: a knowledgeable and professional workforce, transparency in everything they do, responsiveness to the needs of Canadians involved in the electoral process, cohesiveness and consistency in administering the Canada Elections Act, continuously earning and maintaining the public's trust, and stewardship and accountability in how they manage their resources. So Brain Injury Canada is honored to be working in collaboration with Elections Canada. Elections Canada is working with a number of other disability organizations, so we appreciate their continued efforts to make the federal election more accessible for all Canadians. Okay, so we're going to shift gears and now to review the electoral process. So during a federal election, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the following democratic rights. Every Canadian has the right to vote in an election. Every Canadian has the right to run for office in an election. An election must take place at least once every 5 years, and elected representatives must meet at least once a year. And so the info on the next few slides might be known by most, but it is a good refresher nonetheless. So now we're going to take you through the steps in the electoral process. So step 1 is the dissolution. So the Governor General ends Parliament on the request of the Prime Minister and directs that the writs of election be issued. The Chief Electoral Officer issues the writs. These direct Elections Canada officials, called returning officers, to hold an election in each riding. Elections Canada sends preliminary lists of voters to the returning officers. So step 2, the candidates. Once an election is called, each party decides who its candidates will be in each riding. A candidate can also run for election without a party as either independent or no affiliation. Step 3, campaigning. During the campaign period, candidates try to convince voters that they are the best choice to represent them in Parliament. This is when we see all the signs on lawns and have all the town halls and public meetings. So step 4, voting. The most common way to vote at the polls is on election day. Electors must prove their identity and address before getting a ballot. They then go behind a voting screen to privately mark their ballot. Election workers must follow strict procedures to ensure the secrecy of the vote. And step 5, counting. Once the polling stations close, Elections Canada officials open the ballot boxes and count the ballots. The candidate who receives the most votes in the riding becomes its member of Parliament and represents it in the House of Commons. The political party that has the most MPs usually forms the government, and the leader of the political party with the most MPs typically becomes the Prime Minister. So now we know what the voting process or the election process is, why you should vote. Many people don't vote in elections. Your vote counts. Your vote is your voice. Voting for the candidate of your choice is a privilege in our democracy, and that is not an option to many people across the world. By casting your vote, you are choosing the candidate you think will best represent you and your interests and what's important to you. You're engaged and informed in the electoral process. You're supporting democracy and everything it stands for. You're showing your responsibility and interest to how the country is run, and you're stating a vested interest in the future of Canada. Elections have been won by just a few votes, so every vote matters. Even if the candidate you choose does not win, your vote shows where your support lies, and this can help shape the government's decisions. So now we're going to talk about the challenges and barriers faced by those with acquired brain injury during the campaign and voting process. In February 2019, Brain Injury Canada sent out an online survey to get feedback on past experience with the electoral process. This survey was distributed in both French and English to the 60+ provincial and community brain injury associations across Canada, as well as to our other partners for dissemination to their members. The results give an insight into the experience of Canadians and the barriers they face. We are presenting the feedback in 3 key areas: challenges in access for those with ABI and access to information, challenges for those with ABI in the campaign process, and challenges for those with ABI in the voting process. You may identify with some or all of the following barriers. So with regards to access to information, the way information is presented, there's too many acronyms and political jargon. It's not written in plain language. There's a lack of visual aids to support written content. There's not enough content in video format, which can be easier to view. There's large volumes of information presented at one time. Websites are hard to navigate, cluttered, and too overwhelming. Content is not accessible by screen readers. Platforms are confusing, making it hard to figure out where the candidate stands on some issues. Candidates not make the time to come in person to disability organizations, so it is not easy to ask questions of clarification. So challenges for those with ABI with the campaign process. Events are not always accessible. Candidates speak too quickly. Large crowd size and noise is an issue for those with sensory issues. Many people get anxious and overwhelmed and lose track of the actual discussion. Events are often not streamed online. This would enable some to attend virtually and watch at their own pace. Events are often held in the evening, which is a challenge for those with fatigue. Transportation to and from events is a challenge and not always available. People face anxiety about speaking in front of large crowds, but still want to be able to voice their questions and opinions. Some events are last minute and people do not have time to prepare to attend. So challenges for those with ABI within the voting process. People feel they don't have time to vote and feel pressured and rushed by lineups. The ballot is confusing and cluttered. The list of names and parties displayed all on one page can be overwhelming. Voting booths are small, causing issues for those with mobility impairments and spatial sensitivities. Polling stations are loud, lighting is too bright, and there are too many people. Polling station workers are not aware of the invisible nature of some disabilities. Those in wheelchairs are moved to the front of the line, but those with invisible disabilities are not. People feel anxious approaching workers for help. People with communication challenges are often treated with frustration or impatience. People have not been allowed to bring a companion for support right to the voting booth. Sometimes it's for balance and mobility issues, and sometimes it's for anxiety. not all booths are accessible and do not have rails or stabilizers to help with those with mobility issues. And people forget what accessible voting aids are available, and they're not clearly posted. So now that we have identified some of the barriers, let's talk about the campaign process and some tips and suggestions to help you navigate. So finding a candidate, it can be a challenge. You need to find a candidate that cares about what the same things you do. These are just some of the interest areas listed here: economy, education, environment, childcare, healthcare. But ultimately, it's up to you to decide. We all have different interests, and we want a candidate that will represent those interests in Parliament. So decide what you're looking for in a candidate. Find out about the candidates, their background, their history. Gather materials about the candidates, either online or in person from the candidate office. Evaluate candidates' stand on issues. Learn about the candidate's leadership abilities, and learn how other people view the candidate. Once the election is called, you can visit elections.ca to find a list of candidates. So communicating with candidates can sometimes be confusing and intimidating, but it is within your rights. These are just some of the ways you can interact with the candidates in your riding. Write a letter. If you are comfortable, call or drop by their campaign office. You may meet with the candidate themselves or with one of their staff who can pass on your needs and questions. Contact the candidate in your riding to see if they have an accessibility policy and if they have staff designed to accessibility. Ask for communication in formats that work for you. Ask for a listing of all campaign events in advance so that you can plan ahead. Offer to educate candidates on the challenges faced by those living with ABI in Canada, and more specifically in their riding. This can help you to be an ambassador of brain injury. So attending public events such as debates, town halls, and public meetings are a great way to interact with candidates and get an idea of where they stand on issues and how they react and answer to questions from the public. Planning ahead can make these meetings more accessible for you and help to find alternative ways to participate if you are unable to attend in person. So make your accessibility needs known. Talk to the candidate, contact their office, contact the venue. Ask if there is an option to live stream the event. Ask for a recording of the event and if it will be made available so you can view it at your own pace. Ask for key messages to be available in plain and clear language. If you find you are fatigued in the evening, ask the candidate for a listing of events that take place in the morning or afternoon. If you have a question for a candidate but are not comfortable asking in front of a crowd, ask a staff person at the event to ask the question on your behalf. If you have a hard time following the dialogue of a long campaign event, contact the campaign office after and ask if a transcript is available. And see if your local brain injury associations have any campaign-related activities happening that you can get involved in. It is important that people do not feel sidelined during the campaign process. Sometimes it takes some clear communication to let candidates know what your needs are. After all, they want your vote, so should make their campaign accessible. Okay, so now I'm going to pass the mic over to Juan. Welcome, Juan.
Thank you, Michelle. So first of all, I would like to thank Brain Injury Canada for hosting us to talk about the upcoming federal election, which is happening this fall. On today's agenda, I'll be sharing with you important information about voting, what you'll need to vote, what your options are to cast your ballot, and I'll also be talking about accessibility, the services that you can expect to see at the polls. Today's objective is to tell you about your options so you can make a plan that works for you in terms of scheduling, in terms of the type of environment where you can vote, in terms of the type of ballot or the different services available. So I will be sharing a lot of information with you. And so I encourage you, after you listen to this webinar, to visit elections.ca or to refer to some of the resources that we'll be sharing with Brain Injury Canada to make voting easier for you. To be sure, some of the barriers that are highlighted in this webinar are not all about voting. Some of them have to do with the campaign process, and so to that end, you should know that we have provided guidance to political parties on how to make their events and campaigns more accessible, and we look forward to hearing from you and getting feedback, certainly about the entire process after the election. wraps up, or you can also find an accessibility feedback form at the polls and online that you can fill out to give us feedback about the actual voting process. So with that in mind, let's first talk about Elections Canada. Elections Canada is a nonpartisan agency responsible for ensuring that Canadians can exercise their vote to vote and be a candidate. And that means that we don't report to the government of the day. We administer the Canada Elections Act in a way that is independent of government. And so come election time, there are 338 ridings in Canada. And so we have returning officers working in each of those ridings who administer the vote. And to that end, we're informing electors about how they can exercise their right to vote, to remove some of the information barriers related to that, so that come election time, you know where, when, and the ways that you can register and vote. Again, you can visit elections.ca if you need more information after this presentation. So let's move on to the next slide. Who can vote? So to vote in a federal election, you must be a Canadian citizen. You must be at least 18 years old on elections day, and you need to be able to provide your a proof of identity and address. We'll go over what this entails in a little bit, but for now, just know that it's required by law. So once you've determined whether that you're eligible to actually vote, you'll need to register. And registering just means that you'll be able to receive information about the federal election. It means that you'll be added to the voters list, which is a database that Elections Canada maintains of qualified electors. And we use this register to create a list of electors for the election. All registered electors receive a voter information card in the mail from Elections Canada after the election is called, which tells you where and when you can vote. You can register in advance, or you can register in person. We'll go over that in the next slide. As I said, well, it's important to register ahead of time so you can get crucial information. You don't have to. You can actually register at the polls. If you choose to register before you vote, you can do it online by visiting elections.ca and using the voter registration service to register or to update your information if you've moved recently. You can also do that by mail. You can either call us at 1-800-463-6868. We'll send you a registration form that you'll need to fill out and return to us by mail using the appropriate documentation. If you choose to register when you do go vote, that's also an option. You can vote at any Elections Canada office across Canada before the Tuesday before election day. And you can also do so at your assigned polling station on election day or advanced polling days when you go vote. What isn't included on this slide, but you should also note, is that if you are a student on campus, you can also, that's considered an Elections Canada office, and so you can register there as well, because we have several campuses offering the vote this time around. Okay, so once you've registered, if you choose to register in advance, you will get a voter information card in the mail. I should note that if you've voted in the past, it's very likely that you are registered. It's highly likely, and you will receive a voter information card in the mail, unless, of course, you've moved and you've updated your address. But what I do want to mention about the voter information card is that it contains very important information. Election time. It tells you where and when you can vote. It tells you about the accessibility of your assigned polling location on election day and on advanced polling days, and tells you how to request assistance in advance, including language interpretation or sign language interpretation if that is something that you need. When you receive your card, make sure to check the name and the address on the card. If there are any errors or if you don't receive a card, you can visit elections.ca or call us, and we'll update that information. You can also update that information when you go vote. And if you do it well in advance, we can also reissue a new card with the correct information. So it's very useful to have the voter information card, but it's not imperative. If you don't have it, again, you can still register at the polls. And one thing that we are saying this time around is that it's easier if you have your voter information card because not only it tells you all of the information about the election, this election, you can actually use it as a proof of address along with another piece of ID, which leads us to the next slide, which is on having your ID to be ready to vote. So you have three options to prove your identity and address. The first option is showing one piece of government issued ID with your photo, name, and current address. That can be your driver's license or a provincial or territorial ID card. The second option is showing two pieces of ID. Both must have your name on it, and at least one must have your current address. So for example, the voter information card and a bank statement, or you can use a utility bill and a prescription bottle, or your student ID card. Similarly, the voter information card can serve as an additional piece of document to prove your address. The complete list of acceptable ID is available at elections.ca. The third option, if you don't have ID, you can still vote if you declare your identity and address in writing and have someone who knows you and who is assigned to your polling station vouch for you. And that option can be done in person at the polls. So, for example, you can have your neighbor or a friend who lives in your vicinity to show up at the polls with you, and they can vouch for you. The voucher must be able to prove their identity and address. And the person vouching for you can only vouch for one person, except in long-term care institutions. Further to ID, just a couple of reminders, which you will find in the next slide. It is that Elections Canada now accepts original ID cards and documents, including e-statements and e-invoices. So for documents issued electronically, you can either print them or you can bring your phone, any mobile device where you can show the e-statement or e-invoice will be accepted. And your voter information card can also be used as proof of ID, as proof of address, as I mentioned in the last slide, along with another piece of accepted ID. All right, so now that you've registered, you have your ID, you've received your voter information card, or alternatively, you've registered at the polls and you've proven your ID. Now let's go over about the actual voting process and about the different options to actually cast your vote. So one of the options, of course, is voting on election day. Your assigned polling station will be open for 12 hours. Of course, the hours will vary by province, but that is an option. You can also vote on advanced polling days. Your polling station will be open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, the week before Election Day. You can also vote at any Elections Canada office across Canada. That includes Elections Canada offices on campus. But you can go to any Elections Canada office before the Tuesday before Election Day at 6 p.m. And depending on which way you choose to vote, what I should highlight is that in some cases, you'll use a regular ballot with the names of the candidates listed on it. In some cases, because you're doing it before the candidates are confirmed, you'll get what's called a special ballot. That means you'll need to write the name of the candidate you're choosing to vote for on it, and we'll have a list of candidates for you. The fourth option on the next slide is voting by mail. For this option, you'll need to apply at elections.ca before Tuesday before Election Day at 6 p.m. to receive a special ballot voting kit in the mail. So if you know that you're going to be away from home on that day, do it right away. You'll need enough time to have the voting kit mailed to you and return to Elections Canada before Election Day. You can also call us to apply for a special ballot in order to vote by mail, and you can also visit any Elections Canada office across Canada. So there are other ways to vote, and you may be eligible to vote in other ways, such as home. If the voting options that I've presented to you don't work for you, if Election Day doesn't work for you, if advanced polling days doesn't work for you, if voting at an Elections Canada office doesn't work for you, or even by mail doesn't work for you, give us a call and we'll explore other options. In some instances, you can vote from home, where we bring the ballot box to you. In other instances, we will come up with if it's the polling station, you may be eligible for a transfer certificate, and we'll explain to you what your options are. What I'm getting at is that at Elections Canada, we have evaluated all the options, and we've evaluated all the polling stations based on different ways that can work for Canadians. So for example, if you choose to vote on Election Day, there may be longer lineups, large crowds, different environments based on the polling station. That might not work for you. And so maybe there's a reason why you would want to choose to vote, or would need to vote by mail from home, from the comfort of your home, and then mailing it in. What I'm getting at is that there are different configurations or different options. And so if you're unsure about what can work for you, give us a call and we'll discuss those options with you so that you can have the best experience possible. So where you can vote, if you vote on Elections Day or advanced polling days, you'll go to an assigned polling station in your riding. To find out where your assigned polling station is located, check out your voter information card, visit elections.ca and enter your postal code in the voter information service box. And if you can't vote at your assigned polling station, there are other places where you can vote. So visit elections.ca, give us a call, and we'll make that information known to you so that you can have an easier time voting. So Elections Canada has worked very hard to make polling stations accessible. And there are 35 criteria to make voting accessible, 15 of which are mandatory and must be implemented at each of the polling stations. So all electors are assigned to a polling station for Election Day, for advanced polling days. We tell you on your voter information card what the accessibility features of your polling station are. And if it doesn't meet your accessibility needs, you can call us or you can visit elections.ca. And again, we'll try to find options with you. When you get to your polling station, there will be an automatic door opener. And if that is not the case, an election worker will be at the door to provide assistance. If your polling station doesn't meet your accessibility needs, or if you need language or sign language interpretation before you go vote, there are some deadlines for sign language interpretation. It's 6 days before Elections Day. You need to tell us. There are deadlines, so call us as soon as you know that you will have an accessibility need that we can accommodate on polling day. In order to make voting accessible, we also have lots of tools and services, and that includes a bigger ballot with candidates' names in large print. The bigger ballot also has You'll notice a difference. It's got larger font this time around. The ballot is bigger, so it's easier to handle. We'll also offer large print and braille lists of candidates on election day. We'll also have a tactile and braille voting template that will help that provides a surface where that matches the ballot, and where an elector can mark the ballot within the appropriate circle of the ballot. We also have magnifiers with light. As I said, we have language and sign language interpretation. There's also assistance marking your ballot if that's something that you need. And we also have pencils that are larger and that are easier to grip this time around. So voting is one way that you can be involved in the federal election. Another way to be involved in the federal election is to actually work during an election. Elections Canada hires over 200,000 Canadians across the country to work as poll workers, and there are different types of jobs available. And to be an election worker, you need to be a Canadian citizen, you need to be at least 16 years old, and remain nonpartisan during the period that you're employed by Elections Canada. One of the characteristics of this job is that it can be long hours. But that being said, talk to your returning officer if this is a way that you'd like to get involved, and make your returning officer aware of your accommodation needs, and they can find a job that is suitable for you. We are looking for the polls to reflect the diversity of our communities, and so we are encouraging people from all walks of life to apply to be an election worker for the upcoming election. All right, so I've been saying contact Elections Canada a lot, and that is because we are working with organizations to get all the information that that people need to make voting easier. But if it's still unclear, give us a call. We will listen to your needs and try to find and discuss with you the different options that are available to make your voting plan, and to discuss any needs that you might have. You can visit us at elections.ca. You can call us as well. Our phone number is 1-800-463-6868. You can also contact us via social media. We have a Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn accounts. If for some reason you need to call us if you're a VRS Canada user, that's Video Relay Service, which uses sign language interpretation, we also welcome inquiries through that means. And lastly, tell us how we're doing, not just during the election, but not just leading up to the election, but also during the election. If there are any issues you encounter at advanced polls, or while voting at an Elections Canada office, or on election day, an accessibility feedback form will be available, and you can tell us either how we did, or if you encountered any issues. At the same time, feel free to voice any needs that you might have to your Elections Canada office or at your polling station. Workers are trained to help. We are adopting a principle of ask, listen, do this time around, which means we're asking electors to actually tell us what their needs are. So tell us what your needs are. We'll listen to your requests, and we'll try to find ways to accommodate so that you can have an improved experience at the polls and have an accessible experience at the polls. So once again, thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them as well from Brain Injury Canada.
Okay, thank you. There's so much, and it is wonderful to see the strides that Elections Canada is taking to make this election accessible for all. Juan will be sharing a lot of their materials that we'll be posting on our website, and we'll also ensure that we post the link to the feedback form on Election Canada website. So there's lots of collaboration and working together, and we'll make sure that as much is posted to our website as well. Okay, so now I'm going to take us through the steps of voting in the context of brain injury. So there are a few things that you need to take into consideration when deciding which voting option is right for you. What does your schedule look like on elections day? If you have doctor's appointments or other commitments, you may want to consider some of the advanced voting options as Juan outlined. Do you have transportation to and from the polling station? And if you need an attendant or friend, are they available on election day to go with you? Please keep in mind that if they are not located in the same riding as you, they will also need to be able to make time to vote. And then also you need to consider, do you need childcare while you're voting? Children are welcome at the polls, but it does add to the chaos. And so if that's something that is a consideration for you, you might need to arrange that ahead of time. So you must also take into account your accessibility needs. Will you have to stand in line for a long period of time? You can call your polling station and find out what are the busy times, the anticipated busy times. Are light and sound sensitivities an issue for you, and will they be aggravated by the environment of the polling station? Do you have the physical and cognitive stamina to visit a polling station? Does standing in crowded areas give you anxiety? And what are the voting tools that are right for your needs? As Juan outlined, there's lots of tools available, so knowing ahead of time what can be helpful for you can help you plan for when you arrive. And if you have short-term memory deficits, will this be an issue if you're voting at the polls? Okay, so lastly, we're going to take you through voting step by step. So this is what you can expect when you go to the polling station on election day to vote. So when you arrive at the polling station, an election worker will be there to greet you and direct you to the right table to pick up your ballot. Don't be afraid to ask them if you need help. They are there to help you. If you have trouble standing, ask for them to bring you a chair. So step 2, once you're at the right table, a worker will ask for your ID to confirm your name and address. They will then check your name on the voters list if you are registered, or add your name if you are not registered. The election worker will then write their initials on a ballot, fold it, and hand it to you. So then you take your ballot behind a voting screen. If you need more space for your walker or wheelchair, ask a worker to make these accommodations. You then mark the candidate you want to vote for with an X or another clear mark. Take all the time you need and don't feel pressured if there is a line. You then refold your ballot. So head back to the election worker who gave you your ballot. They'll take it, tear off a tab, and hand it back to you. And then lastly, you put your ballot in the box at the table. And that is it. You are done and you have voted. So I do want to thank you all for watching and encourage you to share this link within your networks. You can also connect with Brain Injury Canada on Facebook and Twitter, where we'll be posting throughout the electoral process. We'll be posting tips and strategies to help make it easier. I also want to extend my sincere thanks to Juan for participating in this presentation, and to Elections Canada for all their work in making this the most accessible election to date. Thank you and good luck in the coming months. I also encourage you to reach out to and find your local or provincial brain injury association. These associations are available across Canada and are ready to provide support, information, education, advocacy, and a variety of programs and services to both individuals and their families. A link can be found, a listing of all the brain injury associations can be found on our website. And I want to thank you for watching, and we encourage everyone to get out and vote in October. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact Brain Injury Canada or Elections Canada. Elections Canada has attendants ready to answer questions, and we're here for you. So please remember, every vote counts. Thanks very much and have a wonderful day.